All right, we're getting you those visuals from the Hyderabad House. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is hosting the 16th European Union India Summit in New Delhi with the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and visiting President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, to announce the mother of all trade deals, according to Commerce Secretary Rajesh Agrawal. India and the EU have concluded negotiations on the much-awaited FTA, which is a free trade agreement, and the announcement of the conclusion of talks will be made here after these discussions that you're about to see in a room at Hyderabad House. Those are the stakeholders, viewers, that you see on your screens. Delegation-level talks, those are the representatives that you see. Prime Minister Modi hosting that European Union India Summit at Hyderabad House. The FTA is expected to bring a qualitative change in deepening the overall bilateral ties in a range of sectors. The broad focus of today's meeting is on trade, defense and security, as well as climate change, critical technologies and the strengthening of the rules-based global order. Remember, the leaders in this room have already called this the mother of all trade deals. What does this mean for the deepening ties among the leaders in this room is the big question. How soon will this trade deal be implemented is the other big question of this hour. Early in the day, you had Defence Minister Rajnath Singh meet with representatives of the European Union, setting the agenda for this meeting, which is so critical. It's been over 2 decades since these meetings have been taking place, but it's only in the last couple of years that you have been seeing these meetings really fructifying into what you're now seeing on your screen, the handshake among those 3 leaders, all smiles before they entered that room where the delegation-level talks are taking place in Hyderabad House. Aditya Raj Kaul is joining me. He's tracking all the developments on the India-EU trade deal. Aditya, before we get to the big takeaways, let's just tell our viewers how this has been in the making for more than 2 decades, but is only fructifying now on our screens after more than 20 years.
Well, firstly, it's a historic, momentous occasion. And of course, I can officially confirm here on NDTV that the summit-level delegation talks have begun. And this is to finally ink the trade FTA, the FTA between India and EU that has been under talks for a very long time. Of course, it's gained momentum over the last few weeks with several visits between EU and India, finally inking this and clinching this important trade deal between the 2 countries and these nations. European Union has been a close ally of India. There's been a strategic partnership over the last 2 decades. And for the last 2 decades, we have had trade negotiations as well, which have seen various twists and turns. But on your screens right now, the summit-level delegation talks beginning between India and EU at the iconic Hyderabad House in India's national capital, New Delhi. The day began, of course, with a meeting between the High Representative of EU for Defense and Security Policy and India's Defense Minister Rajnath Singh. There will be a defense and security cooperation agreement between EU and India as well. And thereafter, a visit to the Rajghat, where tributes were paid to the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, by the EU leadership, a symbolic gesture that is done by most of the foreign leaders who arrive in New Delhi. And now, at the Hyderabad House, even as it rains outside, the rain gods, very active out here outside the Hyderabad House, but inside a very strategic, important, historic trade deal will be signed between India and European Union. This would mean that on close to 90% of the product between India and EU, there will be, in fact, relaxation of the tariffs. This will give a big boost to the commerce and trade between these countries. And European Union has been very excited about this particular development because this means that more trade and commerce, more inflow of economy for both these countries. Of course, India has been top service provider when it comes to European Union as well. There are a lot of Indians who travel to EU countries for education and, of course, people-to-people connectivity. 2 top leaders from the European Union as chief guests at the 77th Republic Day celebrations. A lot of color in those visuals. While Prime Minister was wearing blue, signifying the European Union, we had the Indian traditional dress colors signifying connectivity between these countries. That will see a major boost today with the of this historic trade deal. We'll see a press statements coming out perhaps 1 p.m. This afternoon, where these leaders will come out to spell out what the trade deal really means and the kind of significant message that it will send out to the larger global community.
Also, Aditya, we did see the delegation from the EU meeting with the Defence Minister Rajnath Singh about 2 hours back. Was that also setting the agenda for the FTA? The big deal that is about to be signed, because defence also, we believe, is going to be a huge part of the understanding between the two parties.
Of course, Vedika, defence and security cooperation are critical, especially at a time when Russia-Ukraine war will be touching 4 years in a couple of weeks from now. There hasn't been any kind of a final resolution when it comes to Russia-Ukraine war. But even though the war is currently on and there have been efforts to bring in peace in this direction, at this moment, of course, a critical meeting taking place between the High Representative for Defence and Security Policy from the European Union, Kaja Kallas, who met India's Defence Minister, Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh this morning. The leaders spoke briefly, but significantly they will be signing an agreement when they meet here at Hyderabad House in presence of the top leadership from India and European Union. So security and defence partnership between EU and India would be quite significant. There are several countries in the European Union domain which already have a significant defence partnership with India. France tops the list with a lot of fighter jets from France that have been very actively involved with the Indian Air Force. That is a significant cooperation that we have seen in the past, and now that being taken to another level. Trade and commerce has been a subject matter that has been discussed threadbare over the last 1 year because of a lot of controversies and critical decisions by the Western governments over the last 1 year. Over the Greenland issue also, there's been a debate between the United States and Europe, which resulted in tariffs that have been revoked for now. But negotiations are underway. And under that global turbulence, this kind of a trade deal between EU and India is bound to send a very positive message to the global community that when global community is speaking about barriers and trade barriers that have been put over the last 1 year, here is a message of positive signaling from India and EU that are reducing tensions, that are reducing barriers, and instead are trying to bridge the gaps, the historic gaps that have been there, that will bring people from India and EU closer together, and there will be more trade and commerce, and there won't be any bureaucratic delays, etc., or tariffs that will impose restrictions between these countries. So a very historic milestone between India and EU, and in a few minutes from now, we'll see both these leaders speaking at the summit-level delegation and then threadbare discuss the trade deal with the press.
Yes. All right, Aditya, do stay with me, because just some moments back we had India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi also speak out on this deal. Let's just listen into what he had to say.
ये समझौता ट्रेड के साथ साथ डेमोक्रेसी और रूल ऑफ लॉ के प्रति हमारे शेयर्ड कमिटमेंट को भी सशक्त करता है। साथियों, ईयू के साथ हुआ ये फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट ब्रिटेन और एप्टा समझौतों को भी कॉम्प्लीमेंट करेगा। इससे ट्रेड और ग्लोबल सप्लाई चेन दोनों को मजबूती मिलेगी। मैं भारत के नौजवानों को, सभी देशवासियों को इसके लिए बहुत बहुत बधाई देता हूं।
The mother of all deals, saying that this will be a huge boost to manufacturing. But Aditya Rajkol still with me. Aditya, I want to understand from you at this point, the timing of this deal really. It's significant, obviously, for the reasons that we've already discussed, but also comes at a time when the global fault lines are really shifting at this point.
Well, that's right. The global turbulence has been a subject matter over the last 4 years, ever since the Russia-Ukraine war began, and then we had the second major conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza after the terror attacks in southern Israel that have led to a lot of problems when it comes to connectivity, trade, essential supply chains being affected as well. But during that time, there were hectic negotiations that took place between India and, of course, the European Union. And that is now being taken forward in the form of this critical and important trade deal that will be signed between India and EU. Of course, there were major roadblocks in the last 2 decades, but that have been fine-tuned. There has been major consensus that has been achieved. Of course, Piyush Goyal had visited the European countries, and there was a high-level delegation that visited India just 2 to 3 months back. that finally sealed and inked this deal. While 20 of the major points were discussed, there were final 3 to 4 major roadblocks, but that have been settled as well. And today is that momentous occasion when the mother of all deals that was discussed at Davos as well will be inked. And in the next couple of hours, after the summit-level delegation talks are over between these countries, we'll see the signing of the agreement take place. And finally, we'll see the two leaders speak to the press about what this really means, not just for India and EU, but for the global community. And would this be a beginning of a positive trajectory, not just between India and EU, but globally, bridging the gaps and reducing tensions and barriers when it comes to trade and commerce?
Aditya, also, it's important to note here that this new partnership comes at a time when Europe is seeking to reduce its dependence on countries like China.
Absolutely. There is a lot of messages that have been sent out, especially by US President Donald Trump on trade with China, especially with the recent announcement of a deal between China and Canada. Trump hasn't been very happy on that front and has been sending out a message to Canada to reduce dependence on China and not completely abide by the directions of the Chinese. Of course, there is a global turbulence on that level as well. But in the midst of the global tariffs policy, in the midst of angry remarks coming in from US President Donald Trump, especially warnings when it comes to India-EU trade deal as well, we saw Besant, top aide of Donald Trump, also warning the EU on the EU-India trade deal, saying that EU is trying to fund its own war when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war. So Washington, D.C. would be watching this very closely and wouldn't be very happy with the India-EU trade deal, especially when the India-US trade deal hasn't been finalized. But be it so may, finally an EU-India trade deal, an FTA that has been spoken about time and again. And finally, we'll see inking of that agreement in a few minutes from now.
All right, do stay with me while we also tell our viewers why this deal is being called the mother of all deals, why it's so significant. It's because a lot of the statistics that we're about to bring to you on this deal that is taking place, of course, just kind of wrapping it all up at Hyderabad House. But what is it that India wants? Zero duty access for textiles, of course, being one of them. Leather, handlooms, processed foods. That's what India is looking at, zero duty access for these four. Meanwhile, let's also just tell you what the European Union wants market access to. It wants market access to automobiles, to wines and spirits, to high-tech manufacturing. So that's where the understanding is at right now. Let's also tell you about the trade weightage between the European Union and India. When it comes to the European Union, it's 9% of EU's global exports. Bilateral trade between 2024 and 2025 in US dollars stands at 136.53 billion. India exports stand at 75.85 billion. India imports stand at about 60.68 billion US dollars. Services trade in the year 2024 stands at 83.10 billion US dollars. Those are the big numbers that we are bringing to you. But like I said, Aditya's there. He's tracking all the developments and it's seeking alternatives, which is really the big story right now. Because Aditya, this comes at a time, like we have been saying, that the global order has been unpredictable. And now you have this big deal coming up. Aditya is not with us right now. We'll try and reconnect with him. To the right of your screens again, viewers, you see those three confident leaders representing India and the EU. That's more of a victory sign in a way. The ease with which you see the three of them holding hands. On screen, you have the three leaders who are the defining people in terms of this big mother of all deals trade. To the left, you have them inside the Hyderabad House, where talks have begun, delegation level talks. Narendra Modi hosting the 16th European Union India Summit in the national capital with President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen and visiting President of the European Council Costa. And they will be very soon announcing the details of that very big historic trade deal. Let's just listen in to what Ursula, the President of the European Commission, had said earlier when she was talking about this impending deal with India.
Right after Davos, the next weekend, I will travel to India. There's still work to do, but we are on the cusp of a historic trade agreement, Indeed, some call it the mother of all deals. One that would create a market of 2 billion people, accounting for almost a quarter of global GDP. And crucially, that would provide a first-mover advantage for Europe, with one of the world's fastest growing and most dynamic continents.
Aditya Raj Kaul is back with us. He joins us live from Hyderabad House, where that all-important deal is about to be signed in some time from now. Aditya, let's talk about the timeline as well. Like we said initially, more than 2 decades to get to this point. But what next? When will these trade deal nuances be implemented also is the big question when you look forward after we hear more about the FTA.
Well, yes, certainly there is a lot of symbolism and strategic consequence when it comes to the historic trade deal between India and European Union that has been under works for a lot of time. Of course, the strategic partner since 2004, the relationship has been rooted in shared democratic values, multilateralism, and commitment to the rules-based international order that has been certainly under question when it comes to the entire situation and global geopolitics situation over the last few years. Now, the ties between India and European Union stretch back to 1962, when India became one of the first countries to establish diplomatic relations with the European Economic Community, which was a precursor to the EU. But significantly over the last few years, ever since a lot of talk on the geo-economic situation globally when it comes to the Trump administration's global tariff policy as well, there have been a lot of moves that we have seen globally. The global economy has been navigating the renewed turbulence. And of course, we've seen a lot of moves by New Delhi in this direction, which has signed close to 7 FTAs in the last 1.5 years alone. So when it comes to India-EU partnership, EU is India's largest trading partner in goods, with a bilateral trade which had touched USD 136 billion in 2004-25 and steadily has been growing in the services trade as well. Over the past decade, we have significantly seen the European companies expanding their footprint in India's manufacturing, clean energy and digital sectors, while the Indian firms in IT services to pharmaceuticals have depended their presence across Europe. So clearly we've seen a boost in the trade and commerce in different sectors in the last many years. And now with the inking of this agreement, the trade will significantly shift positively. There will be not turbulence, but in fact, reduction of barriers between India and the European Union. And the scale of the FTA will also increase. The negotiations, in fact, as I said, have taken 2 decades. There was a brief hiatus, but they resumed in 2021 when the leaders set an ambitious goal to conclude this in 2025. And now we are standing in the January of 2026 with finally the engagements concluding positively for both EU and India. And in the next couple of hours, we'll see the signing of the agreement and the leadership of India and EU coming together to sign this agreement that will economically, politically and geopolitically bring EU and India closer.
All right. The question I have for you next is, should we see this as a formal negotiation round, Aditya, or is this the final political push to that big deal?
Well, there is a significant message that is associated with this trade deal as well. Of course, EU and India work very closely, they work very silently through global turbulence. As I said, there was Russia-Ukraine war, there was Israel-Gaza-Hamas conflict that led to a lot of disturbance in the connectivity, in supply chains, and of course, especially when it comes to sea routes, there was a lot of difficulty that was faced as well, especially in the Middle East. When it comes to trade, commerce and connectivity, India had worked on the India, Middle East, Europe trade, commerce and the trade connectivity project as well in 2023 when India hosted the G20. But that led to haters and a brief blockage in that because of the wars that were underway. But now, with a significant push towards trade and commerce, towards the FTA between India and EU, I think it's a loud message to the global community that even through turbulence, when you have the positive mindset, when you are trying to link people closer and reduce the trade barriers, certainly there can be way forward, there can be mutual interest, there can be shared interests that people can work towards. And that's what India and EU leadership have proven through global turbulence, and there would be a ripple effect of that in a positive way for other countries also who will be pushed towards doing positive trade and FTAs with India. there have been several FTAs that are under negotiation. As I said, immediately after India and EU, there would be formal signing of the trade agreement between India and New Zealand. We saw Oman and India coming together on an FTA also. And now, next month, we'll see the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, also visiting India and perhaps beginning and resuming talks on trade, the CEPA agreement between India and Canada. So, India headed in a positive direction. There is, of course, the long pending trade negotiations that are underway between Washington, D.C. and New Delhi as well. And even as we speak right now, there is a summit-level delegation talks that are underway in India's iconic Hyderabad House in New Delhi, where EU leadership is meeting Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The nitty-gritties and the fine-tuning of the agreement has already been done. It's just a formality that the signing of the agreement will happen in the next 1 hour. And then perhaps around 1 p.m., we'll see both the leaderships of EU and India coming together, speaking in detail on the positive trajectory that the relationship is going towards and what the trade deal and the FTA between India and EU means for the global community and especially for India and EU.
Aditya, what's the one outcome India has been pushing for the hardest in, this long negotiation process between the European Union and India that has summed up what we're seeing on our screens today? What has been that one outcome that India has really pushed for, according to your sources?
Well, firstly, I've been speaking to a lot of diplomats and EU envoys in India who describe this deal as balanced and forward-looking, one which would lower the tariffs significantly. It will also ease regulatory barriers and open services markets and strengthen supply chain resilience. So that is a very important, significant aspect of this entire development at this particular stage. For India, if you ask me, it promises greater access to 450 million strong consumer market. For Europe, it offers a deeper anchor in one of the world's fastest growing major economies. So from overall perspective, I think it's a win-win situation for both India and EU when it comes to deeper trade and commerce, for connectivity and access to a large market for the European Union and India both ways. So this is a positive trajectory for both. The EU leadership has been waiting for this to happen for a long time. As I said, there were hectic negotiations that were underway, but the FTA, which is the economic pillar of a much broader strategic convergence, has finally happened between India and EU. The Trade Technology Council had also met in 22. And of course, when it comes to trade, when it comes to science and technology, when it of course comes to AI and defense and the strategic partnership, there will be a significant boost that will happen on this trade deal.
Also, any issues that are proving to be sensitive or unresolved for the time being? We know that big deal is going to be announced, but any roadblocks that you heard of on the way, along the way to get to the point that they have in the last couple of weeks or months?
Well, yes, there were significant roadblocks that happened in this, of course, because of global issues and then internal dynamics as well. Of course, both India and EU would have sought the best interest for their own people, for their own economies, and for their own national interests. But when it comes to India, the top agenda for India is the strategic autonomy that India has been pressing on over the last 4 years. That's saying that each and every economic policy, each and every policy will be for the benefit of the Indian consumer, for the Indian masses. And that will be the top priority for the Indian government when it comes to Ministry of External Affairs or the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. So that was the top priority when these discussions and negotiations were underway. And finally, the crystallization of the deal has finally happened. As I said, the diplomats have dubbed this as a balanced and forward-looking issue that will ease regulatory barriers. And of course, tariffs will be significantly reduced as well. A lot of roadblocks in the past, but those roadblocks are in the past. And now a positive trajectory between India and EU. The summit-level delegation talks have begun. And in next 45 minutes or so, we'll see the signing of this agreement and then the top leadership of this country coming out and speaking in detail of what this means for India and EU and what this means for the global community that is seeing a significant, problems and economic barriers over the last 1 year or so.
All right, so the top focus will be on trade, defense, security, climate change, many issues to be discussed there. I'm coming back to you in exactly a minute from now, Aditya. Don't go away because we also want to tell our viewers more about this relationship between the EU and India. So what are India's top exports to the European Union? We're talking about the year 2025 and of course we're talking in billions of US dollars here. Let's talk about those products. First, it's petroleum products, that is about 15 USD billion. Then you're talking about electronics. Smartphones play a huge role here, 4.3 billion USD is what we're talking about. You have textiles and garments, organic chemicals, machinery and computers, iron and steel. So those are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 top factors really when it comes to what are the top goods that India exports to the EU at this point. Important to note because a lot of this also has to do with what the talks are really about inside. Then you have pharma, you have gems and jewelry, you have auto components, footwear and coffee. The other 6 that are important at this point, or rather 5 there that we are talking about, these are the important components when it comes to those talks and the deal that is being signed between the two parties, the European Union and India. Now let's talk about India's imports from the EU as well. Again, we're talking about the year 2025. What are the top goods that are imported from the EU? Again, in US billion dollars that we're talking about. Machinery and computers, electronics, aircraft. You have medical and scientific equipment, gems and jewelry, organic chemicals, plastics. So again, you have top 7 that are mentioned here. In the gems and jewelry, you have rough diamonds, as well as in electronics, you have mobile parts. Important to note that these are the important components that are also imported from the EU, and these are the top goods that we are talking about. All right, we have the German ambassador to India also speaking. Let's cut across.
But over the last 1 year and more, ever since the Trump administration came in, there's been the global tariffs policy that has been debatable all across. And Europe faced the brunt of it recently, although it has been taken back now. How do you see Trump's role in pushing India and EU together?
So, I think first and foremost, we have to say that we are 2 independent bodies, the EU, India. We feel that there is a lot of common ground, so it's good to join hands. But I have to say that, tariff policy is exactly the contrary of what the EU is advising and advocating, and is a clear signal that there are still, important markets. EU is the most important single market in the world with 450 million inhabitants. Agree on free trade. I think free trade is the way forward, and it will be beneficial to all sides of these deals, the European as well as the Indian side, and therefore I think it's high time to do it, and it is a clear message that we send out to the world. Free trade is the way forward and not tariffs.
There is global uncertainty, Ambassador, and this global uncertainty in the last 1 year has been also because of the global tariff policy of the Trump administration. India has been one of the victims, if I can say, of this, and there are several other countries, and Europe faced the brunt also very recently. How do you see this tariff policy trying to reshape the economic policies through the world and creating perhaps barriers rather than bridges?
Well, Norway is a small country. We have an open economy. We have benefited enormously from free trade. So therefore we believe in free trade. We will continue supporting a rules-based multilateral order. We will continue also to support multilateral rules-based trade, and we really believe that dismantling trade barriers is not the answer. We believe in raising them. And that is also why we think the trade treaty between the EFTA countries and Norway and India is a milestone that we will also adhere to.
All right, Aditya Raj Kaul there speaking with both the German ambassador as well as the Norway ambassador. Now remember, this FTA agreement is historic for many reasons, and we will take you through why in the next few hours. The FTA is expected to bring a qualitative change in the deepening overall bilateral ties in a range of sectors. The broad focus of today's meeting, which is underway at the Hyderabad House, will be on trade, defense, security, climate change, critical technologies, and strengthening the rules-based global order. The two sides are also set to unveil a defense framework pact and a strategic agenda. That is what Aditya and I were discussing some time back. The new partnership comes at a time when Europe is seeking to reduce its dependence on countries like China and deepen its diplomatic and economic ties to other regions like India. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is hosting the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa at the Hyderabad House for this historic summit. Remember, Costa and von der Leyen graced the 77th Republic Day celebrations at the Kartavya Path as chief guests. They're now there. They held hands, they shook hands, they smiled for the cameras before they got down to business. Like Aditya Raj Kaul has pointed out, all the work is done, the agenda has been set. It's only now a formality before they come before the cameras and they announce that historic deal, which both sides have called the mother of all deals. And why is it the mother of all deals? Many reasons for that, but the most important is that for more than 2 decades really, both the Indian government as well as the EU has been trying to negotiate this deal, but it's happened only after 20 plus years that you see to the right of your screens how this has fructified. All smiles, shaking hands, getting into Hyderabad House. We believe post 1 p.m. is when that announcement is expected. Von der Leyen last week said India and the EU are on the cusp of a historic trade agreement, which they will be announcing today. That would create a market comprising 2 billion people, accounting for almost a quarter of the global GDP. And that is what we have for you in terms of the most important deal that we're seeing at the beginning of 2026. This, of course, is between the EU and India. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is hosting the leaders and the delegations. In about an hour from now, we should expect the announcement to come through. Himanshu also joining me live on that big story. Himanshu, let's just talk about the big takeaways ahead of the announcement. How is this deal, let's just focus on India for a bit, going to benefit India in the different sectors that I have been speaking about?
Well, remember, India is a country of 148 crore people, and the 27 countries which comprise the European Union, they have a population of around 450 million. So experts are saying that this deal will create a market of almost 2 billion people. So it opens up a new world of trade, new world of business, new world of opportunities for professionals, especially in the services sector as well. It also facilitates flow of new investments in critical sectors in both India and the EU countries. But coming to the specific sectors, these are the labor-intensive sectors where India stands to benefit the most. Already for India's textile and apparel exports, European countries are a major market. And the experts are saying that this will be a game changer as far as India's textile exports are concerned. For textile, apparel, gems and jewelry, all those labor-intensive sectors, there is a huge potential to scale up bilateral economic relations. And also in the case of auto component manufacturing, where India is a major player. And remember, these are all sectors which have been affected because of the imposition of a 50% reciprocal tariff by the Trump administration. And this has had an impact on India's exports in these sectors. So it creates a new alternative market for India's textile exporters. And this, of course, will help them cushion also to some extent the impact of the reciprocal tariff as well. So I think this deal is also a message to the Trump administration that India stands committed to explore new markets, alternative markets, and can always try and get into free trade agreements with countries which matters. Now, remember, Prime Minister Modi also said that this deal will essentially represent 25% of the global GDP and is expected to have an impact on almost 1/3 of the global trade. So that shows the large amount of space that will be created for new business, new investments, new export markets, more market access to companies in Europe, in India, for Indian companies in 27 European countries. So I think it's a mother of all trade deals. The point that the European Commission President also made it very categorically. And this is also a point that Prime Minister Modi has also made. So this is a deal, perhaps the biggest in recent years in the global economy. And this will, of course, will be a game changer for both India and the 27 countries which are now part of the European Union.
Also,
That's right.
Himanshu, let's just talk about the proposed security and defense partnership. Will this facilitate, of course, deeper defense and security cooperation between the two sides? What's the biggest takeaway from the SDP?
Well, definitely, it gives an opportunity for India and the EU leaders to actually not only scale up more cooperation in the case of security and defense matters, but also a reiteration of the fact that there is a time has come where India and the European countries need to work closer, much more closer than what they have been in the past. And considering the fact that the global dynamics are also gradually changing, so this gives an opportunity for India and the European countries actually to revisit the strategic partnership which has existed for a long time and try and scale up cooperation in defense production in other strategic matters. So from economic point of view to defense and strategic matters, clearly the India-EU summit is all set to be a game changer for both India and the European Union.
You know, before the announcement, this might be a bit premature, but I want to understand from you, Himanshu, at this point, what does the Indian government see as the big strategic payoff from the mother of all deals?
Well, the most important, as I said, is that this creates a new platform to scale up the economic cooperation between India and the European Union nations. And this comes at a time when there is volatility in international economy, in international trade, following Trump's reciprocal tariffs. And as you know, the Trump administration continues to impose 50% reciprocal tariff on India. And this, of course, has had an impact on India's exports in some of the critical export sectors, especially those which are labor intensive. So I think European Union and India FTA creates a new platform to scale up India's economic cooperation with 27 member states of the European Union. And this, of course, is the mother of all deals, as Prime Minister said, and I repeat, that this deal represents 25% of the global GDP and is likely to have an impact on 1/3 of the global trade. So that shows the scale. And remember, this is the first FTA that India has had with a very major developed global trade market in Europe. So I think it's a big game changer, a big day for India's economy and India's exporters.
All right, Himanshu, do stay with me. Let's also just tell our viewers the EU and India had first launched negotiations for the free trade agreement in the year 2007 before the talks were suspended in 2013 due to a gap in ambition. The negotiations were relaunched in June 2022. So that's the journey in brief that we're talking about between the EU and India. Here's also a report on what we should expect during this meeting.
India and the EU has announced conclusion of FTA negotiations. This will happen on 27th of Jan. So it's a crucial day that we'll be watching out for this development. The pact is nearing its finishing line after 18 years and these talks started in 2007. Piyush Goyal has termed this FTA as the mother of all deals. This, probably will look forward to eliminate import duties of over 90% goods that are traded between EU as well as India. In terms of what the expectations are, well, India is looking at a zero duty market for sectors such as textiles, leather, footwear, handlooms, processed foods, etc. EU is seeking greater access to Indian markets for auto exports, wine, as well as emerging high-tech manufacturing sectors. Sensitive sectors such as agriculture and dairy are kept out of the deal. And overall, EU has also been protective of its beef, sugar, as well as rice markets. In terms of the EU and India trades details so far in how FY25 has fared, EU markets account for about 17% of India's total exports. Exports to India constitute 9% of its total overseas shipment as well. India-EU bilateral trade was at USD $136 billion in 2024 and 2025, of which exports were $75 billion and imports were $60 billion. The services trade in 2024 stood at around $83 billion. In terms of what sectors, India is a major exporter to EU. That includes counters like petroleum, electronics, textiles, machinery, organic chemicals, iron and steel, gems and jewelry, pharma, auto parts, footwear and coffee. On the flip side, you have major imports that we do from EU include counters like machinery, computer, electronics, aircraft, medical devices, scientific instruments, gems and jewelry, organic chemicals as well as plastics. Lastly, in terms of where FDI flows stand. India cumulative FDI flows from April 2000 to September 24 stood at $117.4 billion, and FDI from EU represented over 16.5% of the cumulative amount of FDI equity inflows from all countries.
All right, a lot of business, as you can see, to be negotiated, to be spoken about. Remember, most of the negotiations, all of it is done. This is now merely a formality before they ink that pact. The mother of all deals, all the details here on Breaking Ground and NDTV.